Psalm 22 is a poignant expression of anguish and despair, often associated with suffering and abandonment. My God, why have you forsaken me? This powerful opening conveys a deep sense of abandonment and despair. David felt isolated and tormented, describing physical and emotional pain as well as mockery from others. In verse 11, he expresses a feeling of being surrounded by danger and needing help. He pleaded with God not to be far from him, because trouble is near, and there is no one to help. This verse reflects David's deep anguish and vulnerability during a crisis, likely relating to his experiences of persecution or personal suffering. David illustrates his tribulations, noting that he has been surrounded by many bulls, and not just any bulls, but strong bulls of Bashan. The bulls of Bashan represent powerful enemies, symbolizing forces that are formidable and intimidating. The verse continues, "They open their mouths at me, like a ravening and roaring lion." In this psalm, David describes being in a state of weakness and distress. Psalm 22 verse 12 states, "Many bulls surround me, strong bulls of Bashan encircle me." This verse captures a vivid image of overwhelming threat and aggression, reflecting the psalmist's feelings of vulnerability and despair. The image of being surrounded by angry bulls, determined to injure and trample their target, is indeed quite fearsome. Bashan, an ancient region that is now part of Syria and Jordan. It was a place of giants and mighty oaks. Bashan was associated with strength, wealth, and plenty. It was also famous for the quality of its cows and flocks. Moses described how God had provided the people of Israel with curds of cows, milk of the flock, and fat lambs and rams of the breed of Bashan. As David described the difficulty he was facing, he begged God to not be far from him. David found himself in an impossible situation, surrounded by powerful opponents as strong as the bulls of Bashan. Despite these daunting circumstances, David knew that God was near, that God was greater, and that he could rescue his soul from these threats. David praised God, and announced a time when God would receive worldwide acclaim and worship. Jesus used some terms from Psalm 22, exclaiming like David that God had forsaken him, Mark 15 verse 34. Just as it seemed that God had forsaken David, it also seemed that God had forsaken Jesus. In the same way, David was ultimately delivered from death. At the cross, the strong bulls of Bashan surrounded Jesus and defeated him, but Jesus was ultimately victorious, and was delivered from the grave. David had never seen the righteous forsaken. God delivers those who trust in him, even in the face of impossible situations. Psalm 22 acknowledges suffering as an integral part of the human experience. The psalmist's cry reflects deep anguish, yet it also invites us to be honest about our own pain. This psalm ultimately leads us toward a place of hope and trust in God despite the vivid imagery of oppression. The psalmist did not lose sight of his faith even while surrounded by enemies. In his distress, he turned to God, showing that even in our darkest moments, we can reach out to our Creator. This is a powerful reminder that faith does not eliminate fear, but it can coexist with it, guiding us through turbulent times. Psalm 22 encourages us to acknowledge our struggles, lean into our faith, and remember that we are never truly alone. We can bring our burdens before God, trusting that He hears us and walks alongside us in our trials like the psalmist cried out. May we always turn our hearts toward hope, even when the bulls seem to encircle us. Despite this deep suffering, the psalm shifts to a tone of hope and trust, recalling God's past faithfulness and deliverance. The latter part emphasizes praise and the ultimate restoration, concluding with a vision of future generations praising God. In our lives, we often encounter challenges that feel insurmountable, whether they be personal struggles, societal pressures, or spiritual battles, especially when we are about to get a breakthrough. In moments of despair, we may question our faith or feel abandoned, but the psalm reminds us that it's okay to express these feelings to God. We too can feel overwhelmed by our circumstances just as the psalmist felt surrounded. We may be surrounded by the strong bulls of Bashan, but we have the greatest bullfighter on our side. The impenetrable forest of Bashan in your life would come down. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.